And now Clare Manuel and Ian Mills from LDP will tell us about legal assistance for economic reform, the LASER programme.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So we're talking about a new DFID programme. Rather than spending a long time outlining what it's all about, you've all got on in the middle of your tables a one-page summary. So you might just like to distribute that. What Ian and I are going to do, I'm just going to highlight a few aspects of LASER and explain at a very high level the way it operates, and just draw out 4 key features of the programme. And then Ian's going to speak a little bit more specifically about the work we're doing in one LASER country, which is Rwanda. So LASER stands for the Legal Assistance for Economic Reform Programme. We are a programme, but actually we are a little bit more like a fund, in that we're a pot of money that comes from DFID HQ and is managed by DFID HQ. It's from the investment climate team. And that money is to be spent in at least 8 different countries. So that's quite an unusual setup for DFID justice programming. The programme is implemented by private contractors, by KPMG and by our firm, Law and Development Partnership. LDP does the day-to-day programme management and all the technical inputs. So it's a very traditional donor programme in that sense. It's quite a small programme. It's £4.3 million to be spent over just over 3 years. So it's about £500,000 per country. So it's not big bucks. And we're just finishing our first quarter, so this is very early days for us. LASER's approach is absolutely chimes with what we heard this morning, and in fact I'm slightly embarrassed that you may think I wrote this while the presentations this morning were going on. I didn't, but we are designed to be highly flexible, to be demand-led, to work in a very incremental way, to test things out, to be very politically engaged and informed in the way we work. That is absolutely core to the way that LASER is designed and to the way that we're now implementing it. Our offer is not a justice-wide one. It's quite an interesting contrast there to what you were just saying. We are more specific. At the end of the piece of paper, we ask what support can LASER provide. And it is commercial law and justice. We've actually have defined that pretty widely, and commercial law and justice isn't a term of art. It can more or less be, well, it can be quite a lot of things. It can be dispute resolution, it can be legal frameworks, it can be looking at commercial contracts. We have a great deal of flexibility to define it widely. So that's just a brief overview of what the programme actually is. And I just wanted to draw out 4 features that I think are really important in the way we're implementing the programme. The first one is that our entry point is absolutely problem-driven at a high level. The problem is commercial law and justice constraints. And what's clear to us as we go to developing countries and speak to ministers of justice is that this is a problem that is on their minds. Our offer of assistance in this area has been accepted with alacrity. I was very interested to read the communique from the G7 Plus group of justice ministers who met for the first ever time a few months ago. They were not talking particularly about access to justice for poor people. What they were worried about was commercial contracts, particularly around extractives. So we're addressing a problem that they are worried about. And as an aside, I mean, in this programme, that is sort of all we can do. We do have a boundary. We are a commercial law and justice programme. But Mark has put up on his matrix of different funding mechanisms the Uganda Basket Fund. And that began in the late 1990s, precisely focusing on this problem. What happened there was every time Linda Chalker, the then Secretary of State, came to Uganda, President Museveni would say, please can you give me UK judges to help me with my backlog of commercial cases. And that was the genesis of what became a fully fledged, holistic national approach to justice. So I think commercial law and justice is a very interesting entry point for a broader dialogue about justice. So first point, it's a problem-driven approach. Secondly, the way the program's been set up, we have a very different dynamic from a traditional DFID justice program. We don't have a program implementation unit in any countries. We don't have parallel funding mechanisms. Because we're funded by HQ, it's putting it too strongly to say that we're arm's length, but there is a bit of a distance between us as implementers and the funding agency. And it's been interesting talking to different country offices, who particularly the Rwanda country office, have said to us, we're not your client. You've got to be clear about who your client is, but it's not the country office. And that creates an interesting dynamic for us. It creates an interesting dynamic in terms of our relationship with the countries we're working with. So the model that we have been using in some cases is embedding advisors. And we spoke this morning about who is your client. And in that kind of circumstance, there is certainly one sense in which our client is very clearly the developing country government. I mean, not least because we sign an MOU with the Ministry of Justice and their confidentiality issues involved in that. So it's partly a client-lawyer relationship. The dynamic's different because we're going in with an offer. When we go and speak to ministers of justice and make this offer, they're quite taken aback. And we got some feedback that it was really nice to have someone representing a donor who came in making an offer rather than a demand. So, you know, we came in and said, what can we do to help you? We weren't asking them to meet conditions or to respond to what we wanted. It is a very open, flexible offer. And I think the dynamic, finally, is also different because we don't come with a big pot of money, initially at least. What we come with is the offer of quite low-level, small-scale technical assistance. But we do have the potential to back that up with access to more assistance through various routes, partly because we are also tapping into pro bono support given by UK lawyers, but also because we're talking with different country offices who've asked us to assist them with their programming on investment climate issues. So we're not going in with a big checkbook. We're just going in with quite a small scale offer, but there is potential for money there if it's needed. So a different entry point, a different dynamic. Third thing is, this has already been touched on, so I'll only mention it briefly, but we go in with really carefully selected people. And I suppose in addition to the points that have been made already about the need for people who can operate in a very political, iterative way, I think there is something a bit different about the justice sector, and I probably would say this, wouldn't I, because I am a lawyer, but I do think there is something about a lawyer relationship, and I know that speaking to ministers of justice, I'm at a disadvantage because I'm a solicitor, not a barrister. So yeah, I think there is a thing that goes on there. So it's partly having the right technical people, but it's also having the people who can see the bigger picture and operate strategically. Finally, before I hand over to Ian, all those principles, I think, are things that we've all agreed about in this room. We've talked about them this morning. But the challenge for us as we move into implementation is how do those things fit with log frames, work plans, theories of change, payment by results, which is how we're being paid. How can we square that circle, if you like? And Ian will talk a bit more about how it operates at the country level. But I think the kind of the key for us has been our overarching log frame. And obviously it's more complicated than this, but I'm just going to read out one indicator, one outcome indicator, which is significant changes in commercial law and justice policy, practice and capacity in partner developing countries, stories of change. So we are committed to doing some really good things, but we don't know what they're going to be yet. And our log frame recognises that, and DFID have agreed to that. Ian, over you to talk about Rwanda.
Yes. Okay. So The laser Rwanda engagement is where the global log frame then has to become a reality on the ground, and that's where we're finding a few challenges. So in Rwanda, we have a long-term advisor in place, so embedded in the Ministry of Justice, so Mini-Just. And that advisor is a laser advisor, so she is working on really the nexus of justice and economic issues. So she's very outward orientated, working with a lot of the economic actors, so Minicom, RDB, Mininfra, so the commerce and the infrastructure ministries as well. So at the outset of this, we had to decide, well, what is the work plan going to be? And there was demand from the ministry to have the advisor, but what are the specific problems? And in Rwanda, a lot of you will know that people will say things like, well, there isn't a competition authority, or there isn't enough investment. There's a number of problems, and you have an overarching EDPRS2, the PRS for the country, which is a very helpful framework and sets out a lot of good areas to work in. So we went through the typical problem identification and deconstruction phase, which in part was us testing things like 5 whys technique, which is when you ask someone, what is the problem? They tell you. You then proceed to ask them 4 more times why that is. So it's a very, it has to be handled delicately, and I think this is what Claire was getting at. You in trying to deconstruct these problems, it helps being there, so it helps having an embedded person, so you're not coming as an outsider. But it also requires tact in trying to find what the real problem is. So that advisor for us on laser is one thing she's working on is trying to challenge some of the presumption that a competition authority is the answer to a lack of competition. We're also working on inputting into competition laws, so the area where legal expertise can help economic reform, but not coming at just a presumption that this is what we should be doing. And another area is contract management and the quality of contracts. So government was losing a lot of money through a lot of litigation, rising predominantly from inconsistent and poor quality contracts. So we're working on model contracts to try to get them rolled out to line ministries to help reduce some of that litigation. So again, all trying to contribute to reduce the number of cases in courts. So those are the type of work plans that we've been doing, and experience to date is fairly consistent with what with some of the literature. So trust has been extremely important, and the inconsistency with trust taking time, yet the understandable push for results. And so no doubt we'll be balancing that as the program continues to build. The flexibility that Claire mentioned is crucial, so being able to just be very open and responsive has been crucial for the program, as you probably expect. Proactivity in manoeuvring around with other actors in where to intervene has been a very key lesson as well. And then actually just some technical quick wins with the ministry, so those who really just to build your legitimacy helped, even if they aren't contributing to your transformational change. So just to end with the challenges, the main one is about the log frame. So a programming one, and very interesting concepts of about whether the log frame is just the accountability mechanism, or are there other ways. And in laser we have a global log frame, and then we have a country log frame, and the country log frame relates to the work plan. And one tension is if we really have concrete items at that level, it will largely restrict us going forward as to what we're working on, our ability to be dynamic. And so the current thinking is whether we can have short work plans, short log frames essentially at the country level. And so that's our current thinking in the program, which are very much, this is all in discussion with DFID. But if we can build in discrete things which have come out of a problem-driven iterative process, that we can say, right, we've identified these, we're going to do them for the short term, and then once we're at this stage, through an ongoing process, we can then take stock again and design the next short-term work plan. So much more of a rolling process that will redirect itself depending upon experience. So that is currently what we're thinking our approach might be, to try build in flexibility at that level while linking to what is very helpful broader long-term terminology at the global level. And to keep track of that experience on the ground, we have essentially a diary, what we call something that shows the narrative of what the advisor is going through to help them understand why the next work plan or log frame is different to the previous one. So a tool for keeping track of that, a logic behind it. So that is the approach we're currently thinking. And then another challenge is the authority we have. I think this came up previously. An advisor sitting in the ministry, we have an MOU, and we presented to the minister saying this person will be taking a very problem-driven approach, but to what extent that has really sunk in, and to what extent they still see that person as just providing inputs to the ministry, to what extent they really see it as working with other stakeholders, trying to influence change behind the scenes to some extent. So again, that's something which I think we're continuing to balance. And then the last challenge is also come up again, the need for the right skill set to achieve this. So it's come up more than once today that the specific people that do this, but I'm hopeful that there are a few. And so it's just about getting these people with the technical expertise in the area, but with the political understanding and with the big picture and attention to detail. So those are our challenges.